He did what? Why didn't you take him to medical?
Welcome to Worlds Collide. Please comment, like, and subscribe for more. Chapter 13. Diplomatic Maneuvers. The trip proceeded without incident. Shay's mother attempted to persuade her to make peace with her father twice more without success. Neither would concede their stance. The diplomats endeavored to plead on Trash's behalf with even less progress. Grashru probed us for our plans multiple times before Shay eventually refused additional meetings. The diplomat, Grafiosh, liaison to the council, approached each of us separately with similar inquiries. But neither of us trusted those working directly with Trask. I trained daily with Profre, expanding on my initial education. They resulted in the familiar fading bruises. Shay would attend to my injuries every evening, massaging strained muscles or applying pain salve to help me relax. I had to admit proudly that my mistakes were fewer, though the more proficient I became with one technique, another would be added. Frey said little during our training, only explaining that pain served as the greatest teacher. I would have to learn from my mistakes while I was alive to do so. We mostly remained in our section of the ship except for our daily meetings with Grasha, Profre, and Shro. We sat for hours discussing security for each of us, communication expansion, and resource allocation should Shay prevail against her father. Discussions in our secure quarters involved extensive preparation for our meeting with the awaiting diplomats from the Homeworld Council. Grasha managed the continuous contact, preparing for our upcoming meetings, accommodations, and requests. True to the captain's prediction, we arrived at Sarah's station 8 days later. Shay and I stood on the astronomic platform, gazing out the forward viewport as the Ravisher nosed into the looming station. Sarah's station blocked out the stars like an eclipse until it completely filled the thick glass. I marveled at the size. It could easily have accommodated the ship 20 times over. Shay glanced over at me when I whistled in admiration. This is one of our smallest outposts. It's primarily used as a relay station for our science and reconnaissance ships. There were another dozen or more ships of varying sizes docked throughout its many ports. Two of the ships, similar in size to the Predator's Hope, featured sleek hulls littered with enough antennae that they resembled a porcupine. Another ship distinguished itself from what looked like cargo vessels and other smaller craft. Its features were streamlined and so dark it almost blended into the space around it. Only the flickering of lights like distant stars provided minimal natural illumination. It makes our largest structures on Earth appear like a child's play toy, I remarked in awe. I can almost understand why your father doesn't perceive us as significant. My father comprehends nothing, she growled. I took her hand and squeezed reassuringly. I said almost. Not that I do. We departed the observation deck after the Ravisher eased to a gentle stop at the port. It would take several minutes to establish a secure connection to the station, enough time for us to migrate to the designated diplomatic exit. We planned to arrive late enough to give her parents time to disembark before us. Shay had wished to avoid interacting with her father until she was compelled to during the diplomatic meetings. We arrived with our security escort half an hour later. Only Frey awaited us when we arrived. Shro and Grasha had gone ahead to see to our berthing. Shro had insisted on carrying my bags. I argued the need to carry my bags, but she had insisted that only she would be able to bypass security checkpoints with the weapons in tow. Free entered the tunnel ahead of us without a word or acknowledgement from us. We simply followed several feet behind with our security trailing several feet behind us, essentially creating a safety bubble for us. The gantry emptied us onto a pristine deck with walls cast in soft hues of pastel green and blue. The lighting illuminated everything in a brilliant white that filled every crevice. Two Krathens stood waiting for us with what appeared to be either security or aides, both dressed in purple robes, one trimmed in black and the other in silver. The larger of the two with the silver-trimmed robes stepped forward. Welcome. I am Counselor Gratrier. I will serve as your liaison to the council. Gratrier was not much taller than my own 6 feet. His gray and white fur was short and lay tightly against his slender frame. His deep blue eyes seemed to take us both in with casual interest. He waved to his companion. This is Gracie Kess. She will be your military liaison. She said nothing, only nodded in acknowledgement. Her golden eyes absorbed us with cold, calculating precision. Please follow us. Gratrier took a position next to me while Gracie Kess flanked Shay. We have prepared rooms for you in accordance with your communication officer's specifications. If there is anything else you need, please have him send the request to my office, he stated between casual glances at me. I hope you are hungry. My cook has prepared a meal for us in the council dining hall. We passed 3 security points during our trek toward the center of the station. Each was marked by armed security dressed in white and gray digital patterned uniforms, posted on both sides of a massive blast door with small viewing holes embedded near the edges. The door rolled aside like a spoked wagon wheel, with a soft, mechanical grinding sound like stone against stone. The third and final door opened into an expansive suite of rooms with glass walls. Some were dark, others clear. Beside each room was another corridor that led off toward independent offices, according to Grautrier. The third from the right was apparently ours. We took the one directly across from the entrance. The dining hall stood at the far end. The odor of spices and cooked meat wafted out to greet us before we even entered the room. It was dominated by a giant horseshoe-shaped table that ran down the center, flanked by circular tables of polished synthetic wood. One held glass pitchers of varying colored liquids in the center. "Please sit," gestured Grautrier. "Dinner will arrive soon. We will talk while we wait." The 2 diplomats took seats across from us. Grautrier motioned to the drinks. We were unsure what refreshments Mitchell could tolerate, so we had a selection prepared. The darker colors are fermented options. We, of course, have water and root tea. Shay and I opted for water. It was the safest choice, primarily for me. The ships we had traveled on only offered water due to the nature of their missions. Besides, alcohol might not be the best option if we wanted to retain our wits. "Thank you for meeting with us," commenced Shay after a cautious sip. "Of course," nodded Grautrier eagerly. "I am told you wish to challenge your father for control over the resource in shipping yards?" Shay inclined her head slightly. "Miktar Trask has disavowed me because I will not break the bond with Mitchell. I still hold a controlling share of the empire she began. I only desire the 3 mining planets near this sector and their respective refineries and shipyards." She named off the 3 planets with names I could not pronounce without spitting all over the table in the process. "For what purpose?" inquired Grautrier, speaking for the first time. "To fund diplomatic missions to Earth," answered Shay. "I have read your reports on the humans," Grautrier mused with a doubtful look. "Your own records indicate they are significantly technologically inferior to us. What would be the purpose?" "We excel at warfare and are highly adaptable," I responded. Both regarded me skeptically. "It would require your people generations, by your current development, to be of aid to us," countered Grautrier. "I understand our current limitations," I acknowledged with a nod. "But we have advanced from simple metal ocean ships to manned space exploration within 2 generations without assistance. Imagine what they could accomplish with our help," continued Shay. "I propose we offer limited technology for their assistance in the war against the Stalath." "And they would agree to risk their lives. Why?" asked Grautrier. "We are inquisitive. The Earth governments crave technology, which you continually adapt for use against each other," interrupted Grautrier. "Imagine if we were to focus our attention on your enemies. We have fought each other over technology and resources throughout our entire existence. The temptation to venture outside our own star system could be enough to unite Earth," I countered. Food arrived then, interrupting further conversation until the staff had exited. Dinner consisted of 2 bowls of meat and fruits. The meat steamed before me, but was raw enough that a talented veterinarian could possibly revive it. It smelled of herbs, somewhat like pepper and basil, with an undertone of cinnamon. I selected a piece gingerly, careful not to burn myself in the process. It was, to my amazement, warm and juicy throughout. The texture resembled a roast that had been slow cooked throughout the day. My mouth began to salivate the instant it touched my tongue. I leaned back with a blissful moan, savoring every second of the experience. I swallowed and chased it with water. Grautrier smiled as he watched me. "We are fortunate to have fresh krisa. I am pleased it is to your liking." "The flavor is exquisite," I commented. "Your cook is very talented." We continued to discuss the benefits of bringing humans into the conflict. Most of their objections were expected, and we had already prepared a response for those. How did we become bonded? Were humans carnivores? How many human governments? The questions were endless. What about your offspring? Inquired Grautrier. We knew the question would eventually arise, but the bluntness of it struck unexpectedly. I chewed contemplatively while Shay answered. We would raise the cub as any youngling. It would learn from both of us and eventually decide for itself what it would do as an adult. There is much debate about its viability, remarked Grossikes. There is no indication it would not be, I commented. I have monitored the medical reports carefully. And you understand them? Asked Grossikes with a note of curiosity. I nodded as I swallowed a piece of meat. I was a combat medic and then a nurse when I left Earth. I possess training and experience in multiple medical disciplines. Grautrier clapped his paws together once the last of the bowls were whisked away. You have given us much to think about, he stated, looking at Grossikes. We will, of course, have many more questions once we contact the council. We were escorted to our diplomatic suite after a brief exchange of niceties before our departure. Shro greeted us inside the door when we arrived. She was still dressed in her military uniform. How was dinner? She inquired casually. Very good, I responded cheerfully. Our suite divided into 8 rooms. Shro and Grasha occupied 2 of them, while 2 bunks for security filled another. One was a small dining hall containing a small kitchen located in the back. The other 2 were dedicated to security and communications. That only left our personal room. While the rest of the suite was utilitarian, our sleeping quarters were quite spacious and decorated in burgundy and gold, with interwoven silver accents. I met Frey in the gym the following morning. Our sparring session shifted to techniques around hand-to-hand combat. The first hour was spent learning different grappling moves that aimed to exploit Krathen weak points. The rest of the session was spent with me being tossed around like a rag doll. I swear you're enjoying this way too much, I grumbled breathlessly between gulps of air. Frey flicked her ears in amusement. Maybe a little. I sat on the mat, leaning forward, my legs spread and my hands resting on my knees. What do you think our chances are? I asked finally. I still hung my head with exhaustion, but my lungs no longer burned and were beginning to fill with air once again. Shay's are good. Yours, not so much unless you learn more, Frey remarked in a serious tone. I looked up at her in exasperation. That is not what I meant. No, she agreed. The military is desperate. You must win their support, Frey advised. I was on my second day of being tossed around easily by Frey when Grossikes arrived to observe my poor attempt at submission. I became distracted by the sound of her claws clicking against the hard deck. The momentary interruption sufficed to allow Frey to flip me onto my back and lock my arm out into an armbar. I lay momentarily stunned, looking up at the military liaison. Frey released me just as fast as she had applied the pressure. I lay there looking up, panting. Good morning, Grossikes, I panted cheerfully. Are you what we have to expect from your species? She inquired in a condescending tone. I took the opportunity to roll back and fling myself up to my feet. I still leaned over, breathing heavily but still proud of myself. Do you mean determined and unafraid of pain? Yes, I inhaled deeply and stood to my full height. It just so happened she stood almost a head taller than I, much taller than I recalled from our first meeting. What may I do for you, Ambassador? I simply came to observe your training, came her disinterested voice. We were about to conclude our session, offered Frimer. Grossikes glanced at Frey and back to me. That is a shame. She sounded disappointed. I had hoped to participate. I looked to Frey, questioning. She kept her expression neutral, but retrieved 2 staffs from her bag, offering one to the ambassador and then myself. Grossikes' smile held no humor as she studied the long piece of wood. She shed her formal robe at the edge of the mat to reveal a lean but muscular physique beneath. Her fur was dark with streaks of gray that spoke of age tempered by years of training. We squared off across from each other, waiting for Frey to announce the start of the fight. It started anticlimactically as we circled the mat looking for an opening. Grossikes struck first. The staff spun with blinding speed toward my left shoulder. I managed to deflect it away, but just barely. I allowed the momentum to bring the backside of my own staff around to impact hers with a resounding whack. She stepped back and grinned. Not a good sign. She advanced with a flurry of blows that drove me back. I managed to counter all but one that caught me in the side. I managed to shift my body to absorb most of the impact, but it still sent electric fire through my flank. I hissed in pain but remained upright, straightening. I caught the fingers of her right hand during the next round. She released the staff with that hand and shook it in pain but smiled at me. It almost seemed genuine. Almost. Rather than using both hands this time, she held it like a sword. I watched wearily as she rolled her wrist to spin it around in circles. The tip of the staff moved in a blur and a whoosh of air, mere inches from my face as she advanced. I did not try to counter right away. I instead studied her moves, keeping my distance until she became overconfident in her abilities against mine. I had not yet trained in sword fighting, but I knew the momentum of the extended range would increase its force against my soft skin. I saw the almost imperceptible advance before it actually came. I noticed the bunching of muscles that signaled her intention like a loudspeaker. I ducked under the swing, drove my shoulder into her chest, spun, and made contact against her back with a backward strike. Grazikes pitched back in alarm and then forward as my staff struck her just above the tail. She emitted the most blood-curdling noise I had ever heard. It reminded me of one time when I stepped on my cat's tail as a kid, but much louder. Grazikes regained her composure. Her whole body responded as though nothing was amiss, but I could still perceive the pain in the way she struggled to keep her ears up and in the hardness of her eyes. She handed the staff to Frey before turning to me. "I look forward to our next session," she stated evenly, before bowing her head with a poorly hidden grimace. I reached down and retrieved her robes to hand her. "I would be honored by your presence," I expressed formally. I presented her the diplomatic robes. I had retrieved them to spare her the pain the simple action would have elicited. It also allowed her to retain her dignity before me. No sooner had the door shut behind her than I flinched, clutching my side in pain. I had been doing my best to hide it during the remainder of our match. Frey's ears lost their neutral expression as they flattened out to the side in distress. "How badly are you injured?" For the first time, I noticed the bruise that encompassed the lower section of my ribs and upper obliques when I lifted my shirt. "I think I broke something," I seethed through gritted teeth. "We need to get you to medical," she stated in alarm. She wrapped the arm on my good side over her shoulder and began helping me to the door. "No," I managed through gritted teeth. "You require medical attention," she argued. "Home," I gasped. Each step was agony that sent waves of nausea spreading through me. Frey eyed me wearily but nodded. The journey seemed to take an eternity. Twice I nearly blacked out from the pain while my head spun like a merry-go-round. Tears streamed down my face, which contorted in pain as we walked. Frey continued to urge me repeatedly to go to medical. Each time I would shake my head vehemently. I wanted to speak, but my throat resisted the idea. Shro and 2 security officers rushed to take me from Frey the moment we stepped off the lift. I cried out in pain as the 2 security officers simply scooped me up and rushed me to my room where Shay waited anxiously. "What happened?" she snarled at Frey, who to her credit held her ground. "He sparred with Grazikes," she explained in frustration. "He did what? Why didn't you take him to medical?" Shay seemed to be beside herself with anger. "I tried." He refused, frustration and concern evident on Frey's face. Shay entered the room as one of the security team cut away my tan shirt. "How is he?" I winced and jerked away as he probed my injury. "2 broken ribs, maybe more damage. I cannot tell without scans." "Can he be moved?" she asked tightly. The officer shook his head. "I would not until we know the extent of his injuries." "Summon medical." "Tell them we need a doctor." The security officer turned to leave. "Do not give out any details on the comms," Shay called out. I reached out to grab Shay after a significantly painful spasm subsided. "No," I whispered, not much above a whisper. "Quiet," she hissed at me. "You are in enough trouble as it is." The officer returned. "Medical trauma team is en route." I grasped the only part of Shay I could reach, which just happened to be her tail, and tugged. She turned her sharp gaze back to me as she jerked her tail free of my weak grasp. My fault. Lowered guard. I must have passed out at some point. One second I looked up at Shay's ice blue eyes, and the next I gazed up into the golden eyes of a medical tech. The pain had subsided substantially. It still throbbed sharply, but I could breathe again. "Where is Shay?" I inquired, looking around. Shro stepped into view. "She is in diplomatic meetings." "Ah, shit!" I spat as I tried to sit up. Shro placed a hand on my chest to restrain me. You are not ready. Free talked her out of bringing up your injury. Said she'll see you after. How mad is she? I asked in resignation. Very, she answered. Profre reported Gracie Kess did not show. Something about an old battle injury? Shro lifted her ears curiously. I closed my eyes and started to laugh, but winced with the effort. You need to rest, came the text voice. I nodded and drifted back to sleep. I awoke again some time later to find Shay asleep in the chair beside me, her head resting next to mine. I reached over and gently stroked her whiskers back against her face. She lifted her head sleepily. Well, hello, beautiful, I whispered cheerfully. Shay rubbed her face before running her claws through her mane. I am still mad at you, she growled, except it lacked conviction. How do you feel? I stretched experimentally but flinched when I felt the sharp pain emanating from my ribs. I hurt. She nodded. Good. Serves you right, she stated disapprovingly. I heard Gracie Kess missed the meeting as well, I remarked. Gratrier said she informed her that an old battle injury had flared up. Shay looked at me accusingly. I smiled back up at her. I think I struck a nerve. The doctor examined me again before declaring me free to return to our quarters if I promised to rest for a couple of days. I had no plan to do any such thing, but promised her I would. Shay and I walked back to the room with our security trailing behind, close enough to assist if needed, but far enough to offer a semblance of privacy. We were summoned to a joint meeting with Trask 2 days later. It took us longer than usual to prepare because Shay had to reapply the pressure wrap to my ribs and then allow me the time to regain my composure. The doctor had admonished me about depending too heavily on my nanites and their limits. Gracie Kess had not only broken them, but they were out of alignment and needed to be reset before they could heal. Both Gratrier and Gracie Kess attended along with Trask and his diplomatic team, Grashru and Grafiosh. 2 new faces also presented themselves. Gratrier introduced them as Senior Council Member Fisk Tor and Second Fleet Admiral Trin Hess. I nodded in greeting to each. Shay and her father stared at each other with a mix of betrayal and resentment. I speak on behalf of the Council, declared Fistor without preamble. The infighting between the two of you has caused much disruption, he stated in a demanding voice. He looked between Shay and Trask. Both stared back. Shay anxiously, Trask with apparent arrogance. The Council members' words altered their expressions. The Council has decided to give Shaysea the 2 resource planets closest to Earth along with the facilities for medium ship production. Shay and I exchanged glances of relief. Trask, on the other hand, began to stand, outrage evident on his face. I will not surrender any part of my empire to her while that human sits by her, he growled, pointing at me. You will sit! Fistor did not raise his voice but commanded obedience regardless. He glowered at Trask warningly for a moment before turning his attention to us. The Council still requires ships for the war. You are under contract to provide ships toward that campaign from at least 1 shipyard. We cannot relinquish demand for any more. Am I understood? Shay inclined her head in submission. Yes, Counselor. Fistor indicated Trin Hess beside him. Trin Hess will oversee your planned integration for the humans. You will not make direct contact with any human government without his direct approval. While your idea possesses merit, Miktar Shaysea, we are not confident in its success. We require proof of viability. Trin Hess leveled a steely glance at us both. I will require detailed plans for contact with Earth by any Krathen. Trask glowered at us both. His fur bristled with barely suppressed rage. He wasted no time as he stormed out at the conclusion of the Council verdict. Both of his attending liaisons offered the appropriate submissive gesture before following him out. Everyone except Shay watched him leave. The light hiss of the door closing seemed to rob his departure of any climatic end he might have desired. Fistor continued to address us both. The Council does find your bond concerning. He held up a hand when Shay began to speak. There are no precedents, and so we choose not to interfere. Neither Mitchell nor any other human will be allowed to visit Tathar, however. By extension, his offspring are barred from visiting as well. Why? I inquired simply before Shay could voice her own objections. We had just won a large victory, and I feared she might jeopardize the concession already approved. The counselor contemplated his response for several long minutes. The council believes your presence would be disruptive to our population. The idea of a hybrid child of your union may stir unrest within the already strained political environment. I think I understand. If humanity joined the war on behalf of the Krathen, would it be possible to reconsider your policy? I felt disappointed to learn of the strict conditions of our bond, but the prophecy Shay told me about echoed in the back of my mind. Possibly, he conceded. The Council does not foresee Earth contributing anything noticeable for several generations, however. He stood without further comment and left. Everyone in the room stood respectfully. Trinhes spoke once the counselor was gone. Would you permit us to speak on military matters, Gratrier? Gratrier looked disappointed, but nevertheless agreed. Fistor waited for him to leave before withdrawing a small device from his pocket and placing it on the table. The device began to blink red before eventually turning solid green. Only then did he speak again. Sikes has convinced me to give your plan a chance with some changes. Shay and I exchanged cautious glances before turning back. What changes? Asked Shay finally. The two of you may return to Earth to recruit others who might be receptive to your plans, stated Grazikes. Shazy occupies a unique position to understand humanity and would make an obvious choice to conduct reconnaissance with your assistance. She looked at me directly. You may choose one other to accompany us to the planet. Us? I asked in confusion. Yes, us. I will be accompanying you to the surface to observe your species for myself, she clarified. Because of your condition, Miktar Shasi, I suggest you spend the next year seeing to your new assets, Fistor interjected, picking up the narrative. I will only allow this opportunity to proceed once I am confident in your ability to manage your shipyards and mining facilities. Those take priority over your pet project. Grossikes will keep me apprised of your progress.
Join us for more from Worlds Collide.